So I'm digging into this engine. First thing I found is that it is of a short nose crank variety, which is the multi-slot pulley suggests that it had a long nose crank on it. Hang on a minute, I'm just trying to find bits. So you can tell, usually when you look under the bonnet you look for this. If it's got 4 slots it is short nose, and if it's got 8 slots, these slots here, usually long nose. Someone's obviously swapped this pulley at some point, and this engine over here in the car has got the same pulley, so I'll be interested to see what cranks in that. But with the keyway inserted in the slot, you can see that the keyway isn't fully supported along its whole length. And then the other thing is the bolt itself. This section here is 2.1 inches, and on a long nose crank it's 2.9 inches. So yeah, I've got a short nose crank. Basically what happens is the pulley for the belt goes on here, and as you can see there's only a tiny bit on the outside for this piece to go on. So on a long nose crank it will come all the way through and it'll have a lot more support. Usually what happens is people don't torque it down properly and you get a bit of a wobble on, or it's not on square, and then what happens is this will chatter back and forth, which gives you like ever-changing timing on the belt, and giving, like, then the engine won't run properly, obviously. But I've only had one car that I had a problem with a short nose crank, and I bought it with the problem, and I just put in a long nose crank in the engine. I'm going to start looking at the bearings, and if everything looks good, then we're going to keep this engine, because I'm not really worried about the short nose business. Yeah, if all the bearings are good, then we'll stay with this engine. I'll just buy some rods and a pump. Need a magnet. I'll bring my tool, my hone. To be fair, these bearings still look like new. So this is the side that you probably see more wear, and as you can see that's mint as well. It shouldn't have really, the beginning of the bores, the tops of the bores is a little bit rusty, so I probably shouldn't have just pushed them out without cleaning them up, but I don't intend on using the rings again. I only have one engine stand, and that has the high compression Micra engine on. Right, so that's the pistons and rods out, and we are looking good so far. I'm not going to go as far as taking out the squirters. I am going to go as far as taking the crank out though. Ooh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Runs beautiful. To be fair, the wear on these shells isn't terrible. It looks to be like it's a bit polished here. This one's polished, and then this one's polished. But this one's fine, and this one's fine. Fairly, in my opinion, it's fairly typical wear of a fairly high mileage and fairly high power, considering it's supposed to be 120 horsepower or so, and it had 280. I wouldn't have said the wear was that bad. But I'll set this back down again, and a couple of light scores, so something's gone through it for sure. I'll show you in a minute the numbers and how you know which direction they go in. And now this one's a special one. Why this one looks like this, I do not know. That is effed in the A. Like, that's had a hard life. You can really see the deep scratches. And I can't tell you why. Believe it or not, that's a 1. That's a 2. A 3. Look at this 4. It's like casted in. And then this end one kind of looks like a 3 as well. But I think that's supposed to be a 5. Anyway, you can kind of see it's like a point, like an arrow. They all point towards the front. And that's how you know the direction, always pointing towards the front. I'm not going to clean any of the oil off because it will start rusting almost immediately. But I know you can't really tell from this, but it's got, the journals are mint. Like, I can feel like a tiny score there. You can see it. And then this at the back was the bad main, and to be fair, it looks pretty good to me. Maybe a polish is in order. Last thing I want to do is look at the oil pump and see if there's any scoring inside there. So what I got to do is I got to undo all these. Usually they are mega tight, and you undo them with an impact screwdriver. So if you haven't seen one of these before, you hit it with a hammer. That's doing up at the minute. There we go. And then you got to find the correct bit, which is probably that one. So what I do is I pop this in and I take the slack up a bit. And then it kind of helps. What we're looking for now is like any scoring. So you got your dots. So we got 1 dot there and 1 dot here. They basically show you which way is up. I mean, if you've gone this far and you've got your engine apart, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of a look to see if you have any damage. So the way, I'll just quickly try and explain how this works. Oil gets drawn up through the bottom, it'll come into here, it'll get compressed into these gaps and like pushed down into this channel down in here. Now if you follow around here, this is a pressure release valve. So what happens is, if pressure gets exceeded, it pushes this plunger, which is just a ball and a spring, or a piston and a spring, and the oil will come back through here and just continue on its journey. And so this channel here basically is going to be it, like whatever PSI the engine is, and it will just come up here and out of this port into the engine block itself, which is going into there, into the oil galleries, which will feed the squirters and all the bearings and the cylinder head and all that. So you can see there's scores in there and on that little bridge piece there. So those scores are from foreign objects going through the system which shouldn't be there, something like bearing material or crap that you've put in the top with your oil, and these can create a loss of oil pressure because obviously oil can like bleed back through. So now I'm just going to pop this all back in, put the middle bit in first. And this is driven by flats on the crank, which are those flats there. Skyline engines like the RB series love to spin up. The oil pump will just spin on those flats, wind the flats right off, and that's because they only have like half. See that face? On a Skyline engine, only half of that face is driven. That's why people put crank collars on, and what the crank collars do, you shrink them on and they give you 100% contact. And it's a similar situation to the long nose, short nose crank problem with the MX-5 engine. If you get a tiny bit of movement, that over time that movement becomes larger movement, resulting in failure. So that's the block stripped down as far as I'm going to go today. Needs to be thoroughly cleaned, so I'm going to order up some main bearings. I'm going to start getting the gaskets and everything I need, look into seeing who can polish my crank for me, order up the rods, find some clean pistons, yeah, and basically just work through it, just try and get the bits I need.